Walking over the millennia-old stones of the Via Appia, one hears echoes that transcend time, as if each step reverberated with the vital heartbeat of the Roman Empire. The worn slabs, polished by the endless friction of sandals, cartwheels, and horse hooves, stand as silent witnesses to an epic that transformed a small city on the banks of the Tiber into the pulsating heart of an unprecedented empire. The Via Appia was not merely a road. It was a vital artery that connected peoples, cultures, and markets, unifying under Rome's aegis a territorial expanse that, at its peak, stretched from the Atlantic to the golden sands of Mesopotamia, from the damp cold of the British Isles to the scorching deserts of Africa. Inaugurated in 312 before Christ, under the unwavering determination of Appius Claudius Caecus, the road symbolized a new paradigm of power and strategic vision. It was born not solely from military necessity or logistical pragmatism, but from the very Roman conception of civilization, a network of material and symbolic connections that would consolidate Rome's dominion and perpetuate its influence for centuries. The hallowed motto, "All roads lead to Rome," is not a hyperbole, but a reality founded on precision engineering, expansionist ambition, and the Romans' unparalleled capacity for administrative integration. The Via Appia, reverently called by contemporaries the Regina Viarum, the Queen of Roads, traversed hills and valleys, rivers and forests, following a trajectory that defied natural adversities with technical solutions that still astonish today. It transported not only victorious armies and exotic goods, but also ideas, languages, religions, and above all, the omnipresent influence of Rome. Every segment of the Via Appia condensed centuries of history, serving as the stage for battles, the setting for triumphs and tragedies, such as the macabre spectacle of the crucifixion of the survivors of Spartacus's revolt, who lined kilometers of the road with their bodies hanging, symbolizing both the brutality and the order of imperial power. Throughout its existence, the Via Appia was more than just a path of stones and dust. It became a channel of Romanization through which urban customs, codified laws, and Latin flowed, cementing the cultural identity of the provinces. Its administrative function, crucial for the empire's effectiveness, was intertwined with a spiritual and almost mythical dimension. To traverse it meant to enter the civilized domain, to leave the barbarian sphere and step into the ordered and rational world that Rome prided itself on constructing. Contemplating the Via Appia today, traversing the serene landscapes of Lazio, or crossing the plains that extend to Apulia, is more than a geographical journey. It is a historical and emotional passage that takes us back to the very roots of the Western idea itself. The road, even mutilated by time and modernity, retains its essence, perpetuating itself as a metaphor for the human journey towards progress, domination, but also exchange and communion between peoples. In this documentary, we invite you to follow each stage of the Via Appia, from its political and military genesis to its contemporary resignification as a cultural heritage of humanity. In each chapter, we will reveal how the road shaped not only Rome's physical expansion, but also its very soul, transforming the empire into a cohesive and resilient entity. And so, like the travelers of antiquity who left Rome through the Porta Capena, we now follow the stone tracks of the Via Appia, immersed in a timeless journey that invites us to revisit the glory and ingenuity of a civilization that, more than dominating the world, knew how to connect it through its roads. At the dawn of the 4th century before Christ, Rome was still an emerging power, consolidating its authority over Latium and expanding its influence beyond the Tiber. The Italian territory, however, was not an empty space available for its ambition, but a complex mosaic of bellicose and independent peoples. Samnites, Etruscans, Latins, Campanians, Lucanians, and Bruttians fiercely contested every inch of land, obstructing the inexorable march of the city that would come to dominate the world. It was in this turbulent scenario that the strategic need arose to build a road that would ensure the rapid and efficient mobility of the Roman legions to the south of the Italian peninsula, as well as consolidate dominance over the newly subjugated territories. In 312 before Christ, the censor Appius Claudius Caecus, a man of remarkable political and administrative vision, promoted the construction of what would become the most famous Roman road. The office of censor, although traditionally associated with supervising the census and morals, also conferred broad powers in the execution of public works. Appius Claudius, aware that Rome's destiny depended not only on the strength of its legions, but also on the solidity of its infrastructures, conceived the Via Appia as a fundamental instrument for victory in the so-called Samnite Wars. These wars, especially the Second Samnite War, which broke out in 326 before Christ, represented one of the greatest military and political challenges faced by Rome up to that time. The Samnites, skilled mountain warriors, imposed serious difficulties on the Roman forces, particularly due to the mobility afforded by their knowledge of the intricate trails of the Apennines. Rome, lacking a structured road network, was forced to move its troops through rudimentary and dangerous paths, compromising its response capability and military logistics. Thus, the creation of the Via Appia was a direct response to this limitation, allowing Roman armies to quickly reach the battlefronts, reinforce garrisons, and ensure supplies continuously. The choice of the Via Appia's route was emblematic of the Roman spirit, direct, pragmatic, and relentless. While the traditional routes of the time meandered through the natural curves of the terrain, the Via Appia advanced in a straight line whenever possible, cutting through hills and forests, crossing rivers with solid bridges, and imposing a rational and geometric order upon the landscape. This initial route connected Rome to Capua, one of the most important and strategic cities of Campania, located about 200 kilometers south of the capital. Capua, rich and powerful, was simultaneously a military objective and an economic prize, being fundamental to securing control over the fertile Campanian plain and its trade routes. No less important was the political impact of Appius Claudius Caecus's initiative. By promoting the construction of the road, the censor sought to consolidate his image as a visionary statesman and to reinforce the authority of the Roman state over the Italic communities. So the Via Appia was not merely a military route, it was also a concrete affirmation of Rome's supremacy and its ability to organize the territory under a unifying administrative logic. Each stone laid symbolized the advance of Roman civilization over tribal fragmentation, the triumph of order over chaos, of urbanity over rusticity. Furthermore, the undertaking reflected the growing sophistication of Roman engineering. The execution of such a large-scale project required not only considerable financial and human resources, but also the development and application of innovative construction techniques. Although previous Greek and Etruscan roads already exhibited some important features such as paving and ground leveling, the Via Appia elevated these elements to a new standard, establishing a model that would be replicated over thousands of kilometers of roads throughout the empire in the following centuries. The political and military context that gave rise to the Via Appia is therefore inseparable from the very trajectory of Rome's ascent. Without this road, perhaps the Roman legions would have taken longer to subjugate the south of the Italian peninsula. Perhaps Rome's power would not have expanded with the speed and efficiency that we know. Perhaps ultimately the very history of the West would have taken different paths. The Via Appia, from its very inception, was an instrument of victory and domination, but also a catalyst for Rome's transformation from a city-state into an imperial power. With the initial route completed to Capua, the road would, over the years, become an increasingly important axis of communication, progressively expanding until it reached the shores of the Adriatic at Brundisium and transforming into the longest and most vital artery of circulation in Roman Italy. But before we explore this expansion, it is necessary to understand how the genius of Roman engineering physically shaped this road, which would remain a reference of construction excellence for millennia. Few achievements of ancient engineering impress as much for their durability, functionality, and aesthetics as Roman roads, and the Via Appia, as the inaugural and paradigmatic work of this road system, represents the culmination of Roman technical ingenuity and strategic vision. The excellence of Roman roads was due not only to the careful selection of routes, but above all to the scientific rigor and standardization of construction techniques, which ensured solidity, safety, and longevity, indispensable qualities for maintaining the cohesion and functioning of the empire over centuries. The construction process of the Via Appia, as with other Roman roads, was characterized by a meticulous layering of strata designed to withstand the wear caused by intense military, commercial, and administrative traffic. The deepest layer, called the statumen, consisted of large stones laid directly on the previously excavated and compacted ground, forming a solid and stable foundation capable of supporting the weight of the upper layers and ensuring water drainage. Above the statumen was the ruders, a layer of coarse gravel mixed with lime mortar, providing additional strength and absorbing part of the vibrations caused by the passage of heavy vehicles. Over the ruders was placed the nucleus layer, composed of smaller stone fragments and sand, which functioned as a leveling base and added further cohesion to the whole. Finally, the road surface, the summum dorsum, was formed by large stone slabs, usually basalt or travertine, precisely fitted to create a flat and continuous surface, but slightly convex, in order to facilitate the runoff of rainwater to the sides, where ditches or gutters were placed. This efficient drainage system was one of the crucial factors for the longevity of Roman roads, preventing erosion and water accumulation that could compromise the structure. The width of the roads varied according to their strategic importance and the estimated traffic volume. The Via Appia, in its initial section between Rome and Capua, reached a width of approximately 4.1 meters, sufficient to allow the simultaneous passage of two carriages in opposite directions, which facilitated circulation and reduced the risk of congestion. In areas of difficult access or less traveled regions, the road could narrow, adapting to the terrain or local needs. Alongside the road, crepidines, elevated sidewalks intended for pedestrian traffic, were often built, separated from the main roadbed, to ensure the safety of travelers on foot. Another fundamental aspect of the Roman road system was standardization, ensured by the issuance of technical norms that guided the execution of works throughout the imperial territory. This uniformity allowed military engineers and civilian builders from the most diverse provinces to collaborate in the maintenance and expansion of the road network without compromising its quality or functionality. The presence of the famous milestones, placed at regular intervals of 1 Roman mile, about 1,280 meters, served not only to indicate distances and guide travelers, but also as testimony to the authority and presence of the state, often recording the name of the emperor or magistrate responsible for the construction or repair of the road. The planning of Roman roads took into account not only the efficiency of movement, but also the safety and sustainability of the routes. Whenever possible, engineers sought straight and direct routes, even if this required deep cuts into hills or the construction of complex systems of bridges and viaducts to cross rivers and valleys. The Roman determination to subject nature to the logic of engineering is exemplified in works such as the Ponds Appius over the Savo River, built to continue the Via Appia without deviating from the idealized route. Furthermore, the roads were often lined with trees, which provided shade for travelers and protected the road from the erosive action of the winds. The margins of the Via Appia in particular became famous for the imposing necropolises and mausoleums that rose along its course, especially near Rome, where laws prohibited burials within the city limits. Thus, travelers departing the city through the Porta Capena were greeted by rows of funerary monuments, reminding all of the transience of life and the permanence of Roman glory. The rigor and sophistication of Roman road construction techniques not only guaranteed their functionality during antiquity, but also inspired later generations of engineers. Many of today's modern road routes, especially in Italy and other parts of Europe, still follow the paths established by the Romans, attesting to the long-term vision and effectiveness of their engineering. The Via Appia, as the matrix of this system, remains one of the greatest material testimonies to Rome's ability to transform the natural landscape and build structures destined to endure through the centuries. In the next chapter of our journey, we will follow the expansion of the Via Appia, accompanying its extension beyond Capua until it reached the ports that connected Rome to the Greek world and the East, further amplifying its strategic, economic, and cultural importance. The original layout of the Via Appia, conceived to connect Rome to Capua, quickly proved insufficient in the face of Rome's expansionist ambitions and the need to consolidate control over the entire south of the Italian peninsula. The success of the road as a military and administrative instrument motivated its expansion over the subsequent centuries, transforming the Via Appia into a monumental route that stretched over 560 kilometers, reaching the strategic port of Brundisium on the shores of the Adriatic Sea. This expansion was not merely a physical extension of the road, but also a symbol of Rome's ability to integrate distant spaces, connect regional economies, and project its political and military power beyond the sea. After the completion of the initial section to Capua, Roman authorities quickly realized the need to extend the road southeastward, consolidating dominance over the regions of Campania, Apulia, and Calabria. Thus, the Via Appia advanced to Beneventum, an important commercial and military junction situated among mountains, from where it continued to Venusia and later to Tarentum, one of the largest and richest ports of Magna Graecia. The final link to Brundisium, completed in the 2nd century before Christ, was a feat of engineering and strategy, as it allowed Roman armies and merchants to easily reach the heart of the Hellenic world and, from there, launch military expeditions or establish trade routes with the eastern Mediterranean, including Greece, Asia Minor, and Egypt. Brundisium, located at the southeastern tip of the peninsula, emerged as one of the busiest and most significant ports of the Roman Empire, serving as a vital link between the west and the east. From Brundisium, Roman maritime routes connected with important Greek cities such as Corinth and Athens, and further with the eastern capitals, facilitating not only the trade of grains, wines, oils, and spices, but also cultural, diplomatic, and military exchanges. Thus, the Via Appia was not merely a land path, but an essential part of a much broader circulation system that allowed Rome to assert its presence throughout all regions of the Mare Nostrum. The expansion of the Via Appia also promoted the urban and economic development of the regions it traversed. Cities that were previously peripheral or secondary transformed into flourishing commercial and administrative centers, benefiting from the increased traffic and integration with the imperial system. Rural villas, markets, inns and supply stations, known as mansiones, emerged along the route, offering logistical support to travelers and caravans. This infrastructure enabled soldiers, magistrates, merchants, and ordinary citizens to travel safely and relatively comfortably, reducing the time and cost of journeys and fostering the circulation of people, goods, and information. In military terms, the expansion of the Via Appia had a decisive impact on Rome's ability to project power to the more distant regions of the peninsula. The speed with which legions could be moved from Rome to the southern frontiers was a strategic factor essential to ensuring the pacification of rebellious territories and the maintenance of imperial order. During the wars against Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, at the beginning of the 3rd century before Christ, and later in the campaigns against Carthage, the Via Appia played a fundamental role in the mobilization and supply of Roman forces. The extension of the road to Brundisium also reinforced Rome's centrality as a political and economic metropolis. The road became one of the busiest arteries of the empire, absorbing constant flows of goods and travelers coming from the eastern provinces or departing from the capital towards the edges of the known world. Rome's cosmopolitan character, its ability to absorb and transform diverse cultures, owes much to the effectiveness of its road network, whose backbone was formed by roads like the Appian. Over the centuries, the Via Appia consolidated itself as more than just a simple road. It became an essential element of Roman imperial identity itself. Its expansion represented both the materialization of Roman engineering and administration and the symbolic expression of Rome's dominance over the peoples and territories it integrated into its vast and complex political system. The legions that marched, the merchants who transported their goods, the senators who traveled to administer distant provinces, all trod the same stones, sharing a concrete experience of belonging to a unified imperial space. Today, when walking through the ruins and preserved sections of the Via Appia, it is possible not only to visualize the physical path of the road, but also to understand the expansionist logic that drove Rome to conquer and organize territories so efficiently. The expansion of the Via Appia, from Rome to Brundisium, remains an eloquent testimony to the Romans' ability to think on a large scale, to transform geographies into infrastructures, and to make mobility an essential tool of power and cohesion. In the next part of our journey, we will deepen our understanding of how the Via Appia was articulated with the rest of the Roman road system, forming a true nervous network that sustained the administration and functioning of the greatest empire of antiquity. The Via Appia, although the most famous and emblematic of Roman roads, did not exist in isolation, but was integrated into a complex and dense network of routes that wove together the physical, political, and economic fabric of the Roman Empire. This road network, with tens of thousands of kilometers paved, functioned as a true nervous system of the imperial body, transmitting information, moving armies, enabling commerce, and making possible the exercise of administration over a territorial extension unprecedented in ancient history. The efficiency and breadth of this infrastructure were fundamental to maintaining the unity of the empire, especially in a context marked by vast distances, cultural diversity, and monumental logistical challenges. The Roman road system had as its center and radiating point the very city of Rome. From the capital departed all the main roads, such as the Via Flaminia, which headed north towards Ariminum, the Via Aurelia, which ran along the Tyrrhenian Sea towards Liguria, and the Via Cassia, which penetrated Etruria. Among all, the Via Appia stood out as the southern backbone, projecting itself as the main land axis towards the southeast, crossing strategic regions and connecting the metropolis to the ports that provided access to the east. This radial arrangement of the Roman road system was essential to ensure that from any point in the empire, it was possible to reach Rome, a configuration encapsulated in the famous expression, "All roads lead to Rome." The administrative function of the road system was one of its most notable characteristics. The roads allowed Roman magistrates, imperial envoys, and provincial governors to travel rapidly between various parts of the empire, ensuring the uniform application of laws, the collection of taxes, and political control. To guarantee efficient communication, Rome organized the cursus publicus, an official postal and transportation system that used regular stations for changing horses and vehicles, known as mutationes and mansiones, allowing official messengers to cover hundreds of kilometers in just a few days, an extraordinary feat for the standards of the time. Beyond administrative use, the road system played an essential role in the military sphere. Roman roads were conceived from their origin as instruments for the rapid mobilization of legions, enabling imperial forces to move efficiently to threatened frontiers or rebellious regions. The Via Appia, in this context, was exemplary. From it, legions marched south through Italy, crossed into Sicily, and later participated in campaigns against Carthage, the Greeks, and the peoples of the East. The road was more than a path. It was an artery of war, a vital line of defense and expansion. The economic impact of the Roman road system was equally extraordinary. The roads enabled the circulation of goods on an unprecedented scale, connecting regional markets and integrating local economies into an imperial network that facilitated trade and supplied the cities. Agricultural products from Egypt, oils from Baetica, metals from Hispania, wines from Gaul, marbles from Greece, and spices from the east traveled these roads towards Rome and other imperial metropolises, driving an intense commercial flow that sustained urban life and economic prosperity. The Via Appia, in this context, played a strategic role as a link between the interior of Italy and the southern ports that connected the empire to the eastern Mediterranean basin. The importance of this integration was not limited to material aspects, but also involved a powerful process of Romanization. Roman roads were vehicles not only for soldiers and merchants, but also for the diffusion of Latin culture, Roman legal institutions, monumental architecture, and the very Roman lifestyle. Cities crossed by the Via Appia, such as Capua, Beneventum, and Tarentum, became vibrant centers where local traditions and Roman cultural elements merged, forming a hybrid mosaic that characterized the empire. From a technical point of view, the Roman road system stood out for its standardization and regular maintenance. The state invested significant resources in the upkeep of the roads, repairing pavements, strengthening bridges, and rebuilding sections damaged by floods or natural wear. Specific magistrates known as curatores viarum were responsible for supervising these works, ensuring that the network remained functional and safe. The presence of bridges, tunnels, and aqueducts integrated into the roads demonstrates the level of sophistication of Roman engineering, which was not limited to the road itself, but encompassed all the necessary infrastructure for its continuous operation. The symbolic dimension of the roads should not be underestimated. For the Romans, the roads were material expressions of power and civilization. concrete markers of imperial presence in territories often distant and culturally diverse. The construction of a road was an act of domination, a way to inscribe the authority of Rome into the landscape and to connect subjugated peoples to the center of the empire. The Via Appia, as the matrix of this system, exemplified how engineering and administration combined to create a cohesive, resilient, and expansive empire. Today, when analyzing the Roman road system, it is impossible not to recognize the central role of the Via Appia in defining and ensuring the success of this monumental network. It was the prototype and the model, the axis and the symbol, the road that not only connected Rome to the provinces, but also shaped the very conception of empire as a space united by concrete bonds of stone, lime, and human sweat. In the continuation of our journey, we will explore how this road system was articulated with commerce and the economy, transforming the Via Appia into one of the most important commercial corridors of antiquity. Alongside its military and administrative functions, the Via Appia stood out as one of the most important commercial arteries of the Roman Empire, transforming into a vital corridor for the transport of goods, people, and wealth that sustained the complex Roman economy. Since its inauguration in the 4th century before Christ, the road not only ensured the mobility of legions, but also fostered the development of local markets, stimulated urban growth, and promoted the economic integration of previously isolated regions, consolidating a commercial system that reached all parts of the empire. Over the centuries, the Via Appia witnessed the incessant passage of caravans loaded with the most diverse products: wines from Campania, oils from Apulia, grains from the fertile plains of southern Italy, marbles and precious stones extracted from interior quarries, as well as artisanal manufactures, fine ceramics, fabrics, and utensils destined for consumption by urban elites. The road was also used for transporting animals, both for food consumption and for entertainment in public spectacles, especially the exotic beasts that fueled Rome's thirst for blood spectacles in the amphitheaters. The role of the Via Appia as a commercial corridor was enhanced by its direct connection with the port of Brundisium, considered one of the most important commercial hubs of the Roman world. From there, goods could be quickly loaded onto ships and sent to the eastern provinces, such as Greece, Asia Minor, Egypt, and Syria, establishing a maritime and land trade network of continental scale. Conversely, eastern products such as spices, perfumes, silks, ivory, and precious stones disembarked at Brundisium and traveled along the Via Appia towards the interior of the peninsula, supplying the markets of cities like Tarentum, Beneventum, Capua, and finally, Rome. The constant presence of merchants and travelers along the Via Appia stimulated the proliferation of infrastructure aimed at meeting the needs of these flows. Inns, taverns, stables, vehicle repair workshops, as well as small markets, emerged along its route, creating true road communities that thrived on the incessant traffic. These structures were organized around the Mansionsgau, official stations, that served as stopping points for rest, resupply, and animal exchange, offering security and comfort to those who ventured along the empire's roads. The economic impact of the Via Appia on the cities it bordered was immense. Capua, for example, transformed into one of the most important commercial centers of Campania, known for its agricultural production and high-quality craftsmanship. Beneventum, nestled among mountains, flourished as a logistical hub, articulating commercial flows between the interior and the coast. Tarentum, an ancient Greek colony, became an essential link between the Latin and Hellenic worlds, benefiting from the confluence of maritime and land routes that the Via Appia made possible. The commerce driven by the Via Appia was not restricted to material goods. The road was also a channel for the exchange of currency, contracts, information, and commercial practices. Roman merchants, accustomed to negotiating in various parts of the empire, transported not only goods, but also knowledge, agricultural techniques, monetary standards, accounting systems, and legal forms that contributed to the standardization of economic practices over a vast territorial expanse. Moreover, the Via Appia played an essential role in the human trafficking that characterized the Roman economy. Enslaved individuals captured in military campaigns or acquired in provincial markets were transported along the road towards major urban centers, where they would be employed in agriculture, mining, public constructions, or in the residences of the elites. This dark aspect of the Roman economy reveals how the road infrastructure, by facilitating the flow of people and goods, also perpetuated social inequalities and fed the imperial machine. The land transport system offered by the Via Appia, although slower and more expensive than maritime routes, presented important advantages such as predictability, security, provided by military patrols, and the possibility of direct access to regions distant from the coast. The constant presence of soldiers and the regular maintenance of the road ensured that merchants could traverse long stretches with relative tranquility, even in areas susceptible to banditry or political instability. From a fiscal perspective, the commercial flow along the Via Appia was also a source of revenue for the Roman state. Tolls, customs duties, and taxes on the transport of goods were collected along the route, reinforcing the importance of the road not only as a circulation route, but also as an instrument of taxation and economic control. The existence of inspection stations, where cargoes were checked and recorded, demonstrates the degree of administrative sophistication that characterized the empire. The Via Appia, as a commercial corridor, not only integrated regional economies into the imperial market, but also reinforced the idea of a shared economic community, in which products and wealth circulated under the aegis of the same political authority and within a unified legal framework. This model of economic integration, supported by robust and efficient infrastructure, contributed decisively to the stability and prosperity of the Roman Empire for centuries. In the next stage of our journey, we will explore how, beyond its economic and military functions, the Via Appia was also a space of intense cultural and social circulation, a privileged stage where soldiers, merchants, pilgrims, and artists met, all united by the common experience of walking the same millennia-old stones. More than a mere corridor of stones intended for the circulation of troops and goods, the Via Appia played a fundamental role as a space of social interaction and cultural exchange within the vast and multifaceted Roman Empire. Over the centuries, millions of people of different origins, languages, creeds, and social conditions traveled along it, transforming the road into a true stage of human diversity, where life experiences, technical knowledge, religious traditions, and artistic expressions intertwined. The constant presence of Roman soldiers, who used the Via Appia to move between borders or participate in military campaigns, was one of the most visible elements of this circulation. The march of the legions, with their banners fluttering, their disciplined formations, and their impressive logistical apparatus, represented not only the military might of Rome, but also the concrete presence of the imperial state in every corner of the territory. These soldiers, coming from various parts of the empire, from Hispania to Syria, from Gaul to Egypt, carried with them their languages, customs, and religious practices, contributing to the diffusion and cultural hybridization that characterized the Roman world. But it was not only soldiers who traveled the Via Appia. Itinerant merchants, artisans seeking opportunities, devout pilgrims, traveling artists, magistrates on official missions, masters and disciples journeying to study at educational centers, all shared the same road, each with their own purposes and destinations. This enforced coexistence among such diverse groups fostered the emergence of social relationships, networks of sociability, and often solidarity among travelers who together faced the vicissitudes of the journey, bad weather, occasional assaults, or the simple fatigue of long treks. The Via Appia also functioned as an important channel of cultural dissemination. Writers and intellectuals of the time, such as Horace and Cicero, referred to the road in their works, not only as an element of the physical landscape, but also as a metaphor for public life and human trajectories. The journeys undertaken along these roads fueled literary production, inspired philosophical reflections, and constituted an essential formative experience in the lives of Roman citizens. Young aristocrats, for example, were often sent on long journeys through the empire's roads as part of their education, a rite of passage that provided them with direct contact with the different cultures under Rome's dominion. Along the Via Appia flourished villages, inns, taverns, and markets that served as stopping points and rest for travelers. These places of hospitality became social microcosms where classes and ethnicities mingled. A Roman senator might share the same overnight shelter with a Syrian merchant, a traveling gladiator, or an enslaved person in transit. In these interactions, Culinary practices, styles of dress, religious beliefs, and artistic forms were exchanged, transforming the road into a true laboratory of acculturation and cultural synthesis. The edges of the Via Appia, especially near Rome, were occupied by impressive funerary monuments, tombs and mausoleums that reflected the prestige and status of Roman families who sought to eternalize their memory there. The most famous of these, the Mausoleum of Cecilia Metella, erected in the 1st century before Christ, still stands today as one of the most emblematic structures of the road, testimony to the human desire to transcend death through monumentality. These tombs, at once private memorials and public markers, helped shape the symbolic landscape of the road, giving it a utilitarian as well as ceremonial character. The Via Appia also played a significant role in the religious context of the empire. Not only did the official gods of the Roman pantheon pass along it in solemn processions and festivals, but also new beliefs that challenged established orthodoxy. Persecuted Christians used the road to escape the authorities or to travel on missions. Missionaries and preachers traversed its stones, carrying the seeds of a faith that, centuries later, would become the empire's official religion. The presence of Christian catacombs along the Via Appia, such as those of St. Sebastian and St. Calixtus, attests to the road's importance as a space of spiritual circulation, but also as a refuge and sanctuary. From a legal standpoint, the road played a role in the administration of justice and the exercise of power. Prisoners were conducted along it toward imprisonment or exile. Convicts were transported to serve their sentences, or in more dramatic cases, to the arenas where they would face death as public spectacle. The road itself was the setting for one of the most notorious collective punishments in Roman history, the crucifixion of thousands of enslaved individuals after the defeat of the revolt led by Spartacus in 71 before Christ, whose bodies were displayed along more than 200 kilometers of the Via Appia, a cruel warning of the relentless power of the state. At the same time, the road was also a place for romantic encounters and leisure. Many travelers took advantage of stops to enjoy public baths, visit taverns, or participate in local festivities, experiences that made the journey less arduous and more pleasurable. Roman literature is filled with allusions to romantic encounters and adventures lived along the roads, including the Via Appia, consolidating its image not only as an instrument of power, but also as a space of human experience in all its complexity. Thus, the Via Appia was not merely a work of engineering or a vector of imperial domination. It was, above all, a dynamic social space, a stage where the dramas and comedies of Roman life were daily performed. Through it flowed the empire's lifeblood, not only in the form of armies and goods, but also as an incessant torrent of human stories, of meetings and partings, of joys and sufferings that conferred upon the road a profoundly human and cultural dimension. In the next chapter, we will delve into the most dramatic pages of the Via Appia's history, reliving the memorable episodes that transformed the road into a privileged stage of heroic deeds, unforgettable tragedies, and milestones that altered the course of the Roman Empire. Over the centuries, the Via Appia was not merely a path of passage, but a stage where some of the most striking and emblematic episodes of Roman history unfolded. Each stretch of the road carries the memory of events that defined political, military, and social directions, transforming it into much more than a transportation route, a silent witness to the grandeur and contradictions of the Roman Empire. One of the most tragic and famous episodes associated with the Via Appia occurred in 71 before Christ, at the end of the Third Servile War, also known as the Revolt of Spartacus. This uprising was led by a group of gladiators and enslaved people who, under the Thracian Spartacus, challenged Rome's power for nearly 3 years, achieving several victories against regular legions and spreading panic among the Roman elites. However, after successive campaigns, General Marcus Licinius Crassus managed to corner and defeat the rebel army in the region of Lucania. In a brutal gesture but typical of Roman power logic, Crassus ordered the crucifixion of approximately 6,000 survivors along about 200 kilometers of the Via Appia between Capua and Rome. The macabre spectacle of crosses lined along the roadside had a clear purpose: to serve as a public warning of Rome's relentless force against any attempt at insurrection. Thus, the Via Appia literally became a road of pain and death, a sinister monument to the efficiency and cruelty of imperial order, But the road was not only a scene of exemplary punishments, it also served as a route for the great military campaigns and triumphs that consolidated Rome's power. During the Samnite Wars in the 4th century before Christ, the Via Appia allowed the legions to quickly move into the mountainous regions of southern Italy, securing strategic victories that ensured Roman supremacy over the Italic peoples. Centuries later, during the Punic Wars, the road was fundamental for the movement of troops towards Sicily and the southern peninsula, crucial regions in the confrontation with Carthage. In times of peace, the Via Appia was traversed by triumphal processions celebrating military conquests and the power of victorious generals. Magistrates and consuls, accompanied by their troops and carrying war spoils, marched over its slabs towards Rome, where they would be honored with sumptuous ceremonies in the Forum and the Capitol. Thus the road served as a symbolic extension of Roman military glory, a corridor of triumph connecting the battlefields to republican and later imperial institutions. Another memorable episode associated with the Via Appia concerns its importance in the context of the early Christian communities. During periods of persecution, especially under the emperors Nero and Diocletian, many Christians used the road as an escape route or as a path for pilgrimages and evangelizing missions. The catacombs located along the Via Appia, such as those of Saint Calixtus and Saint Sebastian, became sacred refuges, sites of clandestine worship, and later veneration for the martyrs buried there. Thus, the road was also a space of spiritual resistance, a path traversed both by the violence of imperial power and the silent hope of the faithful. The Via Appia also played a crucial role in the campaigns of Julius Caesar, especially during the period of the civil wars that shook the Roman Republic in the 1st century before Christ. Caesar and his legions used the road to advance rapidly towards southern Italy, consolidating strategic positions and securing essential supplies for their troops. The efficiency of the Via Appia as a military route significantly contributed to the success of Caesar's operations, culminating in his rise as dictator and, consequently, in the transformation of the Roman political system. In addition to episodes directly linked to politics and war, the Via Appia was the stage for countless everyday occurrences that, although less recorded by traditional historiography, were equally important to the fabric of Roman life. Solemn weddings, diplomatic journeys, commercial expeditions, administrative travels, and even sporting and religious practices daily mobilized hundreds of people who traversed its stretches, transforming the road into a space of incessant movement and multiple stories. In literature, the Via Appia immortalized itself as a symbol of travel and reflection. Horace, in his famous satire describing a journey along the road, offers a vivid portrait of the path's hardships and joys, addressing with irony the precarious accommodations, unexpected encounters, and travel hazards. This work shows how, already in antiquity, the Via Appia had become a constitutive element of the Roman imagination, inspiring not only respect for its engineering, but also affection and humor. Thus, the Via Appia cannot be understood merely as a material infrastructure, but must be recognized as a dense historical space where glories and horrors, celebrations and punishments, the everyday and the exceptional intersected. Each stone that composes it carries traces of the footsteps of soldiers and merchants, the tears of prisoners, and the prayers of pilgrims, composing a silent narrative that spans centuries and reaches us to this day. In the next chapter, we will follow how, after its period of apogee, the Via Appia faced decline and the transformations of late antiquity, revealing how even the grandest works succumb to the inexorable forces of time, but also how they can be re-signified in new historical contexts. No human work, no matter how monumental, escapes the inexorable process of transformation imposed by time, political changes, and natural forces. The Via Appia, the Queen of Roads, which for centuries was one of the main vectors of cohesion, power, and mobility of the Roman Empire, was no exception. From the 3rd century after Christ onward, with the worsening of political, economic, and military crises that beset the empire, the road began to experience a process of decline that would profoundly alter its structure, its use, and its meaning. The crisis of the 3rd century after Christ, marked by successive civil wars, barbarian invasions, economic collapses, and widespread instability, directly affected the maintenance of the Roman road infrastructure. The system that for centuries had ensured the conservation and functioning of the roads collapsed, as the increasingly weakened state no longer had the human or financial resources to carry out regular repairs. The security of the roads deteriorated as central power weakened, and the empire's borders were pressed by Germanic peoples and other groups considered barbarians by the Romans. On the Via Appia, the gradual abandonment of maintenance led to the wear of the paving stones, obstruction of drainage systems, and the collapse of essential bridges and viaducts. Sections once solid and safe became impassable, forcing travelers to seek alternative routes or to improvise detours along the edges of the road, which further accelerated its degradation. The drastic decrease in commercial and military traffic reduced the immediate need for repairs, contributing to the vicious cycle of abandonment and ruin. The political transformations that marked the end of imperial unity also directly impacted the fate of the Via Appia. The division of the empire between west and east, formalized in 395 after Christ, reduced the strategic importance of the road, which had previously served as a vital link between Rome and the eastern provinces. The founding of Constantinople by Constantine at the beginning of the 4th century after Christ shifted the political and economic center of the empire to the east, rendering Rome progressively peripheral. The Via Appia, once one of the main axes of circulation for people and goods, gave way to other routes adapted to new geopolitical configurations. Moreover, the advance of barbarian troops over Italian territory, culminating in the sack of Rome by the Visigoths led by Alaric in 410 after Christ, and later by the Vandals in 455 after Christ, exacerbated the situation. Many sections of the Via Appia were destroyed or looted, its stones removed and reused in fortifications, churches or local dwellings, a common process in late antiquity and the Middle Ages. The phenomenon of inspolia, that is, the reuse of materials from ancient constructions, transformed the Via Appia itself into a kind of open-air quarry for populations seeking to adapt to new times of scarcity and insecurity. However, it is important to emphasize that the decline of the Via Appia did not mean its complete disappearance. Sections of the road continued to be used, albeit intermittently and precariously, especially for local transit and religious pilgrimages. In the context of the Christianization of the empire, the Via Appia assumed a new symbolic function, distinct from that which it had held at the height of Roman power. The Christian catacombs located along its length became important pilgrimage destinations, and the martyrs buried in those places came to be venerated by the faithful who traveled the road in search of spiritual inspiration or divine protection. The emergence and consolidation of ecclesiastical institutions in late antiquity contributed in part to the preservation of the memory of the Via Appia, even though its functional role as an imperial integration road was profoundly shaken. The Church, gradually assuming the social and administrative functions that had belonged to the Roman state, also took on the symbolic and spiritual custody of many of the landmarks and monuments that lined the road, keeping its memory alive in the collective imagination. Furthermore, in some localities the road was adapted to new economic and political needs. Rural communities that formed along the Via Appia continued to use it as an access route between villages and agricultural centers, albeit in a fragmented way and disconnected from the former imperial road system. Thus, the Via Appia did not disappear, but metamorphosed, surviving in memory, in practice, and in geography as a resilient vestige of a bygone era. The decline of the Via Appia in late antiquity is an eloquent example of how great human works are intrinsically linked to the political, social, and economic structures that sustain them. When these collapse, the works, no matter how magnificent, cannot remain unscathed. However, the story of the Via Appia does not end with its decline. On the contrary, its rediscovery and valorization in the modern and contemporary era would confer new meanings on the road, transforming it into a cultural heritage of humanity and a perennial symbol of Roman ingenuity. In the next chapter of our journey, we will follow precisely this rediscovery and the legacy of the Via Appia in the modern era, exploring how the ancient paving stones of the road, which once supported the sandals of Roman soldiers and merchants, became objects of fascination, study, and preservation by archaeologists, artists, and tourists from around the world. The course of history is winding, just like the routes that cross mountains and valleys. So too was the destiny of the Via Appia, which after centuries of glory and decline was rediscovered and revalued in the modern era, transforming from a military and commercial road into an object of archaeological fascination, artistic inspiration, and a symbol of the enduring legacy of Roman civilization. The rediscovery of the Via Appia did not occur suddenly or linearly, but as the result of a gradual process, initiated during the Renaissance and consolidated over the following centuries, as European interest in the classical past intensified. Within the context of the Italian Renaissance, the rediscovery of Greco-Roman antiquity became one of the central axes of humanist thought, and the ruins of Rome came to be explored not merely as remnants of the past, but as sources of aesthetic and intellectual inspiration. It was in this cultural environment that the Via Appia began to attract the interest of scholars, antiquarians, and artists who, fascinated by the inscriptions, funerary monuments, and structures still visible along its route, sought to document, study, and preserve it. Works such as the records of Flavio Biondo, considered one of the fathers of Renaissance archaeology, already pointed in the 15th century to the importance of systematizing knowledge about ancient roads. In the 18th century, with the advent of the Enlightenment and the valorization of reason and science, archaeology consolidated itself as a discipline and stimulated systematic expeditions to investigate Roman heritage. The Via Appia, with its extensive paved sections, its imposing mausoleums, and its Christian catacombs, emerged as one of the most important and accessible objects of study for antiquarians and archaeologists of the time. Detailed maps began to be drawn, lapidary inscriptions were catalogued, and the first conservation efforts were undertaken by local authorities and scholars. Simultaneously, the Via Appia exerted a profound fascination on artists and writers who participated in the so-called Grand Tour, a kind of cultural pilgrimage that, between the 17th and 19th centuries, led young European aristocrats to visit the cities and ruins of classical antiquity. The melancholic and grandiose landscape of the Via Appia, with its solemn cypresses, the ruins of mausoleums half engulfed by vegetation, and the millennia-old slabs worn by time, inspired poets, painters, and travelers who found there a living metaphor of the passage of time and of lost glory. Among the numerous artists enchanted by the Via Appia stands out the English poet Lord Byron, who at the beginning of the 19th century walked the road and described it with reverence and nostalgia, evoking the grandeur of the Roman Empire and the ephemerality of human achievements. Likewise, painters such as Hubert Robert and Joseph Wright of Derby immortalized in dramatic canvases the ruins lining the road, helping to consolidate its image as a symbol of romantic decay and the beauty of lost civilizations. In the archaeological field, the 19th century marked a decisive advance in the understanding and preservation of the Via Appia. Excavations promoted by the Vatican and by Italian archaeological institutions revealed new paved stretches, recovered inscriptions and monuments, and deepened knowledge about the construction techniques used by the Romans. The Christian catacombs in particular became objects of careful study and devotional visits, attracting not only researchers but also pilgrims from various parts of the world. From the 20th century onward, with the strengthening of the international movement for the protection of cultural heritage, the Via Appia began to be recognized as a good of universal value, worthy of conservation and appreciation. Italian authorities and international organizations such as UNESCO dedicated themselves to protecting the best preserved sections of the road, ensuring its integrity in the face of threats posed by urbanization, intensive agricultural exploitation, and uncontrolled tourism. Today, the Via Appia is one of the main tourist and archaeological attractions of the city of Rome and its surrounding region. Extensive stretches of the road have been restored and opened to visitation, allowing modern travelers to walk, on foot or by bicycle, the same paths once trodden by legionaries, merchants, and pilgrims of antiquity. The Appian Way Regional Park, created in the 1980s, plays a fundamental role in preserving the area's archaeological and natural heritage, offering visitors not only contact with the ancient slabs, but also with the rich landscape of fields, historic villages, and monuments that compose the road's surroundings. Beyond its historical and tourist value, the Via Appia continues to exert a powerful symbolic influence. It represents in the cultural memory of the West the technical ingenuity, political ambition, and integrative capacity that characterized Roman civilization. Simultaneously, it evokes the transience of human power, reminding us that even the grandest empires are destined to fall, leaving, however, indelible marks on the landscape and culture. Currently, academic and cultural initiatives continue to investigate and disseminate the history of the Via Appia. Digitization projects, such as the three-dimensional mapping of its best-preserved sections, allow scholars worldwide to access precise information about the road and its monuments. At the same time, cultural events, such as historical walks, festivals, and exhibitions, reinforce the importance of the Via Appia as a space of memory and celebration of Roman heritage. Thus, the Via Appia, far from being a dead ruin, remains alive, not only in stone, but in the collective imagination of humanity. Its rediscovery and valorization in the modern era attest to the enduring power of great human achievements and their ability to transcend time, inspiring generations to reflect on the past, celebrate the present, and envision the future. In the next and final chapter of this journey, we will reflect on how the Via Appia, even after more than 2 millennia, continues to connect past and present as a symbolic bridge between civilizations, a road that has never ceased to guide those who venture upon it. The Via Appia, more than a stone path that stretches silently through the Italian landscape, has over the centuries transformed into one of the most powerful icons of the contemporary imagination, simultaneously evoking the grandeur of Roman engineering, the universality of human transit, and the inexorable transience of all civilizations. Its presence in modern culture transcends archaeology and tourism. It has become metaphor, symbol, and inspiration, integrating itself into the repertoire of references that shape the Western vision of antiquity, progress, and memory. Walking the Via Appia today is more than undertaking a historical itinerary. It is embarking on a spiritual and philosophical journey, a plunge into deep time that invites reflection on the foundations of our own civilization. Each uneven slab, each semi-hidden ruin, each tree casting its shadow over the road, suggests not only the materiality of a distant past, but also the persistence of ideals that continue to shape the present. The idea of connectivity, of expansion, of domination over nature, but also of beauty, of technique, and of order. In the artistic field, the Via Appia remains an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Photographers, painters, filmmakers, and writers find in the road not just a picturesque setting, but a space laden with symbolism, where the contrast between the solidity of millennia-old stones and the fragility of dry leaves, swept by the wind, suggests reflections on time, permanence, and ruin. Historical films, novels, and documentaries frequently use the Via Appia as a backdrop or explicit reference to explore themes ranging from the rise and fall of empires to the inner journeys of the human spirit. Contemporary literature, in particular, continues to make the Via Appia a recurring symbol. Modern authors, when evoking it, not only recall its historical importance, but also re-signify its route as a metaphor for great existential crossings. The road appears as a figure of path, of quest, of exile, and of return, composing an emotional landscape that overlays its geographical dimension. This symbolic use renews the Via Appia as a literary space, where each reader is invited to traverse not only the physical extension of the road, but also the meanders of their own memory and identity. In cultural tourism, the Via Appia has transformed into one of the main destinations for travelers seeking an authentic experience of contact with the past. Organized walks, bicycle tours, and guided itineraries offer the public the possibility of experiencing, at a human pace, what for centuries was the daily experience of soldiers, merchants, and pilgrims. This type of tourism, more reflective and experiential, distances itself from the mere hurried consumption of tourist attractions, proposing instead an immersion in history and landscape, an invitation to contemplation and to the understanding of time as a continuous process. The spiritual dimension of the Via Appia also remains alive. Many contemporary pilgrims walk stretches of the road as part of journeys of faith or inner quest, reactivating ancestral practices that associated walking not only with physical displacement, but also with moral and spiritual transformation. For these walkers, each step over the millennia-old stones is a silent rite, a way to establish a tangible connection with the countless travelers who, over more than 2 millennia, shared the same experience. In the academic sphere, the Via Appia continues to be the object of interdisciplinary studies that combine archaeology, history, architecture, anthropology, and even ecology. Researchers from various parts of the world dedicate themselves to analyzing its construction materials, the precise mapping of its original route, the interpretation of the inscriptions and monuments that line it, and the understanding of the social, economic, and cultural dynamics it expressed throughout history. Heritage preservation projects are associated with educational initiatives that seek to sensitize new generations to the importance of conserving this irreplaceable legacy. From an environmental perspective, the Via Appia today integrates landscapes of exceptional ecological value, preserving green corridors that harbor significant biodiversity amid the growing urbanization of the Roman region. The protection of these areas, combining environmental conservation and the enhancement of historical heritage, exemplifies a new approach that recognizes the interdependence between culture and nature, between past and future. Finally, the Via Appia remains a powerful political and cultural symbol, evoking humanity's ability to conceive and execute engineering works that transcend generations and borders, but also warning of the limits and consequences of power. It reminds us that all roads, no matter how solid, are traveled by fragile and transient beings, and that their permanence depends not only on the quality of the stones that support them, but also on the memory and care we dedicate to preserving them. Thus, in the contemporary imagination, the Via Appia is not merely an archaeological vestige or a tourist attraction. It is a permanent invitation to reflect on who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. It is a road that, even with its worn slabs and its margins covered in grass, continues to guide all those who venture upon it, not only to a geographical destination, but to an inner journey where past and present meet, and where each traveler finds at the end of the path the mirror of their own humanity. In the conclusion of this journey, we will reflect on how the Via Appia, more than any road built by human hands, has become a symbolic link between civilizations, an eternal artery that pulses through time, reminding us that, as long as there are those who walk it, Rome and all that it represents will never cease to exist. In every irregular stone of the Via Appia, in every groove left by the wheels of ancient carriages, still pulses the living memory of a civilization that dared to project its roads beyond time, uniting not only territories, but also ideas, cultures, and peoples. The Via Appia, inaugurated over 2,300 years ago, remains not only as an extraordinary achievement of Roman engineering, but as a symbol of the human capacity to shape the landscape, to integrate diverse spaces, and to construct infrastructures that resist the centuries, incessantly dialoguing with the present. Throughout this journey, we have traversed from its strategic origin, forged in the military needs of the Samnite Wars, through its expansion that led Rome to the confines of the Hellenic world, to its consecration as one of the most important commercial and cultural corridors of the Roman Empire. We have seen how the Via Appia was the stage for memorable episodes, military triumphs, exemplary punishments, spiritual pilgrimages, and how its trajectory reflects the very dynamics of the empire: rise, apogee, decline, and finally, resignification and preservation. But above all, the Via Appia exemplifies in a masterful way how infrastructures are not merely physical structures. They are also instruments of power, identity, and memory, built with the technical rigor of superimposed layers, statumen, rudus, nucleus, and summum dorsum. The road also represents the superimposition of layers of time and history, where the present rests upon the past and projects itself into the future. Every traveler who today walks its preserved stretches does not merely relive a physical itinerary, but reenacts a historical and cultural journey that connects their individual experience to the vastness of the Roman legacy. The Via Appia continues to inspire not only historians and archaeologists, but all those who see in roads a symbol of the human effort to overcome distances, establish bonds, and build communities. The maxim attributed to Roman culture, "All roads lead to Rome," thus reveals itself not only as a logistical fact but as a philosophy. The road as a metaphor for convergence, for unity in diversity, for permanence through transformation. In this sense, the Via Appia remains a visible scar on the body of the Italian landscape, a mark that recalls the conquests, excesses, glories, and tragedies of a civilization that indelibly shaped the Western world. But it is not a static scar. It is an artery that continues to pulse, to conduct not armies or goods as it once did, but memories, reflections, and aesthetic and spiritual experiences. In a contemporary world marked by acceleration, by ephemerality, and by planned obsolescence, the Via Appia offers an eloquent counterpoint. It is the silent testimony that there are human works that transcend generations, that resist time not only because of the solidity of the materials that compose them, but because of the symbolic density they carry. Its permanence is an invitation to contemplate what endures, to value the common heritage of humanity, and to reflect on each generation's responsibility in preserving and transmitting that legacy. Thus, as we conclude this journey along the Via Appia, we recognize that it continues to fulfill its primordial function, to connect. It connects distinct geographies, connects diverse times, connects cultures that have intertwined over more than 2 millennia. And above all, it connects each of us to the long and continuous history of human civilization, reminding us that, as long as there are those who walk upon its stones, Rome, with all its complexity and grandeur, will never be completely silent or forgotten. The Via Appia, therefore, is not merely a road that links Rome to Brundisium. It is a road that connects past and present, memory and identity, humanity and eternity. A road that, more than any other, made Rome not merely a city or an empire, but an indelible landmark in the history of humanity.